They claimed her blood was flawed, a biological glitch in a perfect empire, so they cast her into the dust of a dying human world as a final insult. They expected her to wither in the silence of the frontier, but the Dominion made a fatal mistake. They forgot that humans thrive on what others throw away. This is not just a story of exile. It is the chronicle of how a genetic failure and a weary soldier forged a power that would bring the High Elders to their knees. If you want to see the moment the galaxy's greatest arrogance met its match, watch this video until the end. Prepare for an epic saga of betrayal and absolute defiance here at Zenith Imperium, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss a chapter of our galactic history. The Judgment Hall of the High Assembly was a cathedral built of frozen light and absolute arrogance, where the air itself tasted of ozone and ancient secrets. Beneath a dome that pulsed with the shifting constellations of the Velar Dominion, the elders sat in tiered rows of polished obsidian, looking down like gods upon a mortal era. At the center of this crushing grandeur stood Avala, daughter of Elder Mitris, her silver-toned skin shimmering faintly under the judgmental glare of 1,000 artificial suns. Her hands were bound in radiant cuffs that hissed against her wrists, burning not just her flesh, but her very status as a citizen of the stars. She stood tall, her frame unyielding despite the weight of the sentence being read by a voice that echoed with the hollow resonance of ritual. For the crime of dissent, for uncovering the ledgers of blood and the secret trade with galactic warlords, she was being unmade. They called it a genetic failure, a convenient lie to mask the political necessity of her disappearance. Her father, the man who had given her life, sat on the High Council with an expression carved from cold stone, refusing to meet her dark violet eyes. He did not see a daughter. He saw a leak that needed to be plugged, a flaw in the Dominion's pristine image that had to be scrubbed away. The verdict was exile, stripped of rank and heritage, cast out beyond the borders of known space to a primitive human outpost on the edge of the void. To the Assembly, this was a joke, a final act of humiliation intended to break whatever spirit she had left. They believed that by throwing her to the humans, a species they regarded as volatile and insignificant, they were sending her to a slow death in the red dust of a forgotten world. As the guards pulled her toward the transport, the chamber erupted in a ripple of cruel laughter, a sound that Avala etched into her memory as fuel for the fire yet to come. She did not plead, and she did not cry. She looked at the dome of light one last time and whispered a truth that no elder wanted to hear, that truth is not treason, and the weight of their corruption would eventually be their undoing. 200 light-years away, on the jagged frontier of human space, Commander Ryan Torvak sat in a room that smelled of machine oil and the relentless grit of Kestrus III. He was a man made of scars and steel-blue weariness, a soldier who had survived sieges that had turned planets into graveyards. When the orders arrived via a hijacked bureaucratic channel, he stared at the holographic display with a frown that deepened the lines of a lifetime of war. The Dominion was sending him a union contract, a bride he had never requested, a daughter of an elder he had never met. Ryan knew the smell of a trap better than any man alive, and this deal stank of blood and hidden knives. He looked out his window at the barren plains where dust storms swirled like rust-colored ghosts and realized that the Dominion wasn't sending him a companion. They were sending him a catalyst. The transport hissed as its hydraulic struts sank into the red dirt of the outpost, dropping its ramp with the indifference of a scavenger discarding refuse. Avala stepped out into the biting wind, her regal bearing a sharp contrast to the plain grey tunic she had been forced to wear. The guards tossed her single case at Ryan's feet and retreated into the safety of their ship, leaving her alone in a world of iron and ozone. Ryan regarded the tall, silver-skinned exile with a gaze that had seen empires fall, finding not the ugly failure the Dominion had described, but a force of nature wrapped in silence. He did not offer her a crown, but he offered her a chance. He told her that he built for survival, not ceremony, and in that moment, the first link of a chain was forged that would eventually wrap around the throat of the Dominion itself. They stood on the edge of a war neither had chosen, Two exiles watching the twin suns sink low over a horizon that was about to burn. The silence of the frontier was a heavy thing, a physical weight that settled into the cracks of the outpost walls. Avala followed Ryan into the heart of the settlement, her silver skin catching the flickering orange light of the dying heaters. Every step she took was measured, a warrior's gait disguised by the humility of her exile. Ryan did not speak as he led her toward the Spartan quarters he had assigned her. He was busy calculating the logistics of a threat he couldn't yet see, but could certainly feel. The room was a cell of slate-gray steel, containing nothing but a cot and a view of the rusted horizon, but to Avala, it was the first place in years where the walls didn't have ears tuned to the high assembly. She touched the cold metal, her long fingers tracing the welding seams, and told Ryan that while her family had sent the wrong daughter, they had sent her to the right man. She explained the second half of the Dominion's plan. Her arrival was bait, a signal for assassins to descend and erase the evidence of the Assembly's corruption, along with the human commander who now harbored her. Ryan's blue eyes, hard as glacial ice, didn't blink at the mention of death. He had lived with a target on his back since his first commission, and he told her plainly that he would offer her food and shelter, and they would figure out how to kill the hunters in the morning. That night, the first sign of the coming storm manifested not as a fleet, but as sabotage. The outpost's herd beasts began to scream in their pens, their cries echoing across the desolate plains. Ryan found Avala already there, her silver hands deep in the side of a writhing animal, extracting a black, jagged shard of Dominion technology, a bladed implant designed to poison and rot the colony from the inside out. She moved with a clinical, deadly efficiency that suggested she was no stranger to the messy reality of the frontier. As she sealed the wound with a portable med unit, her eyes met Ryan's in the dark, and he realized that the genetic failure he had been sent was a woman forged in the same fire as himself. The settlers, a rugged collection of miners and outcasts, watched her from the shadows with suspicion that slowly curdled into a begrudging respect. When she saved a child from the suffocating grip of a contaminated air filter, using tools Ryan had long discarded as junk, the whispers of alien began to soften into something closer to ally. Days passed in a blur of preparation and weary rhythm. Avala spent her hours recalibrating the outpost's aging defense grids with a precision that human fingers simply couldn't match, while Ryan organized the few able-bodied men into a defense force. They stood together on the ridges at sunset, watching the horizon where the dust clouds gathered, knowing that the Dominion did not forgive and certainly did not forget. Avala warned him that the assassins wouldn't strike directly at first. They would bleed the colony, cutting fences and poisoning water until the survivors were too weak to hold a rifle. Ryan, leaning against a barricade of scarred iron, told her that he had seen marauders use the same tactics on a dozen worlds, and the only way to end the dance was to break the dancers' legs. He asked her why she had chosen to tell him the truth instead of waiting for the chaos to claim her. She told him she was tired of the silence that her family demanded, that she would rather die in the light of the truth than live as a shadow of their lies. The first real attack came under the cover of a moonless night, shadows in black obsidian armor surging against the outer fences with plasma fire that seared the darkness. Ryan was a force of nature, his rifle barking orders in the gloom, but it was Avala who changed the tide. She moved like water, flowing from cover to cover with an alien rifle that sang a song of blue-white death, each shot finding a gap in the Dominion's superior armor. When a cloaked attacker vaulted the barricade, she met him with a curved blade and a crack of bone that ended the threat in a heartbeat. As the attackers withdrew, leaving only scorched earth and the scent of ozone, the settlers cheered. But Avala and Ryan shared a look of grim understanding. This was merely a probe, a test of their resolve, and the real purge was yet to come. The aftermath of the probe left the outpost in a state of high alert tension, the air thick with the smell of ozone and the heavy expectation of a more brutal reckoning. Ryan and Avala did not rest. They spent the following hours moving through the compound, assessing the damage to the steel plates that rattled under the relentless wind. The genetic failure was now the colony's primary strategist, her silver-toned skin glinting under the flickering lights as she pointed out the flaws in their perimeter, that the Dominion's probes had successfully identified. She told Ryan that the High Assembly wouldn't just send more shadows, they would send a statement, likely led by someone who knew her every move. In the Spartan mess hall, over rations of protein stew that Avila noted kept them alive through sheer willpower, they sat in a silence that was no longer awkward, but collaborative. She revealed the depth of the rot within the Dominion, explaining how they traded in enslaved species and bioweapons while pretending to be the galaxy's moral center. Ryan, his steel-blue eyes reflecting a lifetime of seeing through similar lies, realized that the Dominion hadn't just sent him an outcast, they had sent him the only person capable of unmaking their empire. The settlers began to gather around Avila, their initial suspicion replaced by a desperate kind of faith as she taught them how to strike at the weak points of obsidian armor. She moved among them with a quiet authority, a princess of a dying house becoming a general for a frontier of outcasts. One evening, she stood on the watchtower ridge, her violet eyes scanning the twin suns as they sank low, painting her silver skin in hues of blood and fire. She warned Ryan that the next phase of the purge would target their resources, poisoning the beasts and sabotaging the water recyclers to break their spirit before the final blow. Ryan's jaw tightened, his instincts as a commander overriding his weariness as he declared that they would fight back before the trap could be fully sprung. He saw her now not as a burden, but as a partner forged in the same fire of betrayal and survival. As the second week of exile began, a new dust cloud appeared on the horizon, signaling a descent far larger than the previous transport. It wasn't the small team of assassins they had expected, but a coordinated Dominion strike force, banners of the High Assembly fluttering in the wind as a mockery of the wasteland. Avila identified the command skimmer at the center, realization turning her violet eyes into shards of midnight flame. They had sent her own sister Serena, the favored child, the one who chose obedience over truth, to finish the execution. Serena was the golden mirror to Avila's silver shadow, and she had come to erase her family's shame with plasma and steel. Ryan looked at Avila, seeing the steel in her posture as she buried the last remnants of her past, and he promised her that they would give the Dominion a fight that would be etched into the very core of the galaxy. They weren't just defending a ranch or an outpost anymore, they were protecting the spark of a revolution that the Dominion was too arrogant to see coming. The first shells of the siege fell at dusk, explosions ripping through the reinforced structures and turning the red dirt into a landscape of fire. Ryan roared orders, moving from barricade to barricade as the settlers held the line with a tenacity that defied their primitive equipment. Beside him, Avila was a storm in the flesh, her alien rifle spitting blue-white energy with a surgical precision that left the Dominion's elite guard in piles of broken obsidian. She fought with the knowledge that if she faltered, the humans would die for her truth, and she refused to let that be her legacy. Between bursts of fire, she and Ryan stood back to back, a human soldier and a silver exile, two warriors who had found a home in the heat of a battle that the galaxy would never forget. Make no mistake, the Dominion's arrogance was their greatest weakness, and as the colony refused to break, the first ripples of fear began to travel up the command chain of the High Assembly's chosen jewel. The night sky of Kestris III was no longer a void, but a canvas of streaking plasma and the orange glow of burning structures. The siege had intensified into a grinding war of attrition, where every inch of red soil was paid for in blood and spent shells. Ryan Torvach moved through the trenches with the grim focus of a man who had seen the end of the world and decided to fight it anyway. He checked the mining charges wired into the barricades, his scarred hands steady even as the ground shook beneath the Dominion's heavy artillery. Beside him, Avila was the calm at the center of the hurricane, her silver skin smeared with dust and oil, her violet eyes scanning the horizon for the next breach. She had become more than an exile. She was the heartbeat of the colony's resistance, the one who transformed their fear into a weaponized resolve. As the Dominion's elite guard launched a fresh assault, the air filled with the shriek of energy beams and the rhythmic bark of human rifles. Serena, watching from her command skimmer, ordered the destruction of the colony's primary power core, intending to leave the humans blind in the dark. But she had forgotten that her sister was a daughter of the same high technology, and Avila had already rerouted the grid through the very mining equipment the humans used to carve out their living. When the black-armored giants finally breached the outer wall, they didn't find a cowering outpost. They found a killing floor. Ryan and Avila fought in a seamless, deadly rhythm, his raw power complementing her fluid, alien grace. Every time a settler faltered, Avila's voice rose above the din, a strong, clear command that reminded them that they were no longer fighting for a ranch, but for a future that the Dominion could never own. In the heat of the fray, an obsidian-plated commander managed to pin Ryan against a crumbling wall, his blade arcing down for a killing strike. Before the blow could land, Avila was there, her curved blade flashing once as she disarmed the giant with a bone-cracking twist before finishing him in the heavy silence of the dust. Ryan rose, chest heaving, and for a heartbeat, the two exiles stood back to back amidst the smoke and fire, a human soldier and a genetic failure who had become the most dangerous partnership in the sector. The settlers roared their approval, their voices a defiant chorus that carried even to the ears of the High Assembly's favored child. Serena's golden armor shimmered with a cold, frustrated light. She could not understand how a species so primitive and a daughter so flawed could hold back the might of the Valar Dominion. By midnight, the forward momentum of the Dominion had been halted by a wall of human willpower and Aethelis strategy. Ryan led a desperate fallback into the dry caverns behind the colony, using the tunnels he and Avila had prepared as a secondary staging ground. Inside the darkness, lit only by the faint glow of their alien rifles, the survivors huddled together, children clinging to parents who had just learned what it meant to truly fight. Avila moved among them, patching wounds with a steady hand, her presence a constant shield against the despair that threatened to leak in with the cold desert air. Ryan watched her, realizing that the Dominion had committed the ultimate tactical error. They had sent an outcast to a place where outcasts are kings. They had tried to bury the truth, but they had only succeeded in planting a seed that was now growing into a revolution. The dawn of the fifth day on Kestros III did not bring the sun, but a suffocating shroud of smoke that clung to the red earth like a burial cloth. Within the dry caverns, the air was thick with the scent of old iron and the ragged breathing of the wounded, yet the spirit of the colony remained unbroken. Ryan Torvach stood at the cavern's mouth, his steel-blue eyes reflecting the flickering fires of the burning outpost below. He was a man who had led armies into the abyss, but as he watched Avila move among the settlers, he realized he had never seen a leader quite like her. She was a daughter of high luxury now draped in the dust of the frontier, her silver skin glowing softly in the dark as she whispered words of resolve to a frightened child. The Dominion had intended for her to be a burden, a shameful reminder of a life lost, but instead she had become the very steel in the settlers' spines. Avila stepped beside him, her violet eyes scanning the horizon where Serena's command skimmer hovered like a vulture. She told Ryan that the Dominion was no longer fighting a war of retrieval. They were now engaged in a purge, an effort to erase every man, woman, and child to ensure the secret of their corruption died with the colony. Ryan's jaw tightened, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, as he declared that if the Dominion wanted to burn the world, they would have to do it while standing in the flames themselves. He looked at the genetic failure and saw the most brilliant strategist he had ever known. A woman who had turned a collection of farmers and miners into a force that could make an empire tremble. She had taught them to strike from the shadows and to use the terrain as a weapon, turning the Dominion's mathematical precision against its own cold logic. As the morning progressed, Serena's amplified voice rolled across the plains, offering mercy to the settlers if they would only hand over the traitor Avila. It was a classic Dominion lie, a honeyed promise intended to fracture their unity. But the settlers did not waver. They looked to Avila not with fear, but with a fierce, ragged loyalty. Ryan stepped forward, his voice a gravelly roar that carried back to the Dominion lines, telling them that they had chosen their side, and they would hold the line until the stars themselves went out. Avila felt a surge of something she had never known in the halls of the High Assembly, the feeling of truly belonging to a people who fought for one another rather than for power. She realized then that her exile was not a death sentence, but a rebirth into a life of genuine purpose. The final assault began with a thundering of war drums and the grinding of armored transports across the red dirt. Serena's elite guards surged forward, their obsidian plating glinting under the bruised sky, but they were met by a storm of human defiance. Ryan and Avila led the charge out of the tunnels, their movements perfectly synchronized after days of fighting back-to-back. Ryan's rifle barked death, while Avila's blade carved paths through the enemy ranks, her inhuman speed a blur of silver and violet. They fought with a shared instinct that went beyond words, a human soldier and an alien exile standing as a single anchor against the weight of an empire. Every settler who fell was a tragedy, but for everyone who died, 2 more rose to take their place, fueled by the truth that Avila had brought to their world. Make sure you are following this journey of survival here at Zenith Imperium, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to join our resistance against the Dominion's lies. The battle for Kestrus III was entering its most lethal phase, and as the command skimmer drifted closer, Avila knew the time for sisters to face one another was finally at hand. She adjusted her grip on her rifle, her eyes locked on Serena's silhouette, and felt the messy, violent spirit of humanity settle over her shoulders like a cloak of iron. They had tried to bury her in the dust, but they had forgotten that out here on the frontier, the dust is what we use to build empires. The smoke over Kestrus III thickened into a choking black fog as the Dominion's command skimmer descended, its shadow casting a pall over the final line of defense. The air hummed with the lethal vibration of plasma cannons, and the very ground seemed to groan under the weight of the coming execution. Ryan Torvak stood at the breach of the main barricade, his armor scarred and his face etched with the grit of 100 battles, yet his eyes remained fixed on the golden figure of Serena standing atop the enemy prow. Beside him, Avila tightened her grip on her silver blade, her violet eyes reflecting the cold fire of the sister she was about to face. She told Ryan that the Dominion's greatest error was believing that blood was the only bond that mattered, failing to see that the loyalty forged in the red dust of Kestrus was far stronger than any decree from the High Assembly. Serena's voice, amplified by the skimmer's technology, cut through the din of the wind, demanding the settlers hand over the genetic failure or face total annihilation. She called for Avila to face her, mocking the humans as primitive creatures that would only die screaming for a traitor's cause. Ryan felt the settlers around him stiffen, but their fear was eclipsed by a fierce, protective rage as they looked to the silver-skinned woman who had saved their children and repaired their walls. Avila stepped forward, not as a prisoner, but as a sovereign, her voice steady as she told the settlers that she was not their burden, but their weapon. She looked at Ryan, a silent understanding passing between them. This was the moment where the exile's truth and the soldier's will would collide with the heart of the Empire. The final assault hit like a hammer, black-armored giants surging forward with blades of light that cleaving through the barricades. Ryan moved like a force of nature, his rifle barking in a rhythmic song of defiance while his blade found the gaps in obsidian armor with a veteran's precision. Avila was a tempest beside him, her inhuman grace allowing her to weave through the storm of plasma fire, her strikes so fast they seemed almost like light itself. They fought back to back, a seamless fusion of human grit and alien strategy, carving a path toward the command skimmer, while the settlers held the flanks with a desperate, ragged courage. For every line the Dominion breached, another wall of human willpower rose to meet them, fueled by the realization that their lives were no longer for sale to any galactic power. As Serena leapt from the skimmer to face her sister, the battlefield around them seemed to fall into a hollow silence, the duel between sisters becoming the axis upon which the fate of the colony turned. Serena's attacks were a display of perfect, sanctioned training, her gold armor gleaming with the arrogance of her status, while Avila fought with the raw, unorthodox survival of the frontier. Every strike of Serena's blade carried the weight of the High Assembly's lies, but Avila met them with the strength of her chosen family. Ryan circled the perimeter, fending off the elite guards who tried to interfere, his eyes never leaving the silver woman who had changed everything. He saw the moment Serena's guard faltered, the moment the genetic failure proved that her blood was not flawed, but empowered by the very descent the Dominion had tried to kill. The air crackled with the energy of clashing blades as the sisters fought, a dance of silver and gold against the backdrop of a world on fire. Serena's blade, a masterpiece of Valar engineering, hissed with every arc, but Avala met it with a resilience that had been forged in the red grit of Kestris III. Every time Serena mocked the primitive humans, she missed the subtle shift in Avala's tactics, the way she moved with the unpredictable, jagged rhythm of a settler fighting for their home. Ryan Torvak moved through the chaos like a ghost, dropping Dominion guards with cold efficiency, but his eyes never left the silver-skinned woman who had become the anchor of his world. He saw the moment Serena lunged with a killing stroke, and he threw himself into the fray, his rifle blocking the impact with a shriek of tortured metal. Serena recoiled, her golden visor reflecting the terrifying sight of a human and an alien fighting as one. She screamed that it was a betrayal of their blood, but Avala's voice rose above the storm, declaring that blood was nothing compared to the truth of a shared purpose. Together, the soldier and the exile struck in a coordinated blur of lead and light. Ryan provided the cover, his rifle barking a relentless cadence that forced Serena to retreat, while Avala found the openings in the ceremonial gold plating. The genetic failure was no longer defensive. She was a predator, her movements a testament to the strength the Dominion had tried to label as a flaw. With a final agonizing lunge, Avala's blade found its mark, piercing the golden armor and ending the threat of the Assembly's chosen child. As Serena fell, a heavy silence rippled across the Dominion line, the sight of their golden commander defeated by a failure and a human shattering their absolute certainty. Ryan seized the moment, raising his scarred rifle high and roaring a call to arms that turned the settlers' fear into a final, crushing surge. The Dominion's ranks fractured, their black-armored giants retreating in disarray as the realization hit them. They weren't just fighting a colony, they were fighting a new kind of power. The command skimmer, once a symbol of inevitable doom, was now a smoking wreck, its banners torn and its authority erased by the red dust of the frontier. Avala stood beside Ryan, her silver skin streaked with the blood of her past, but her eyes were fixed on a future that was finally her own. The aftermath of the battle was a landscape of smoke and smoldering iron, but as the settlers emerged from their trenches, they didn't look like victims anymore. They walked with the stride of those who had looked an empire in the eye and refused to blink. Avala watched them, feeling the weight of her name transform from a burden of shame into a title of belonging. Ryan approached her, his breath shallow and his body aching, but the steel in his gaze was replaced by something softer, something fragile yet undeniable. They had won the battle, but they both knew the war for the galaxy's soul was just beginning. As the smoke cleared and the twin suns began their descent once more, they stood together on the ridge, a weary soldier and a silver-skinned exile who had just rewritten the stars. The smoke from the Dominion's pride finally settled into the crimson soil of Kestris III, leaving behind a silence that was no longer heavy with dread, but alive with the potential of a new era. The genetic failure stood atop the ridge, her silver skin reflecting the first rays of a sun that no longer felt like a hostile eye. Around her, the settlers moved through the ruins of their ranch, but they did not walk like the defeated. They moved with the quiet, iron-willed resolve of those who had dismantled an empire's myth with their own bare hands. Ryan Torvak approached her, his heavy boots grinding against the vitrified sand, his armor a map of the violence they had endured together. He didn't see an alien, and he certainly didn't see a failure. He saw the partner who had turned a desperate outpost into the forge of a revolution. The data logs recovered from Serena's shattered command skimmer were more than just military records, they were a death blow to the High Assembly's legitimacy. As the truth of the Dominion's secret trades and biological purges spread through the galactic networks, the cathedral of glass and steel on the homeworld began to crack from within. Alliances that had stood for millennia fractured as the word of the exile of Kestrus reached other oppressed worlds, proving that the Dominion's math was flawed and their power was finite. Avala, the daughter they had thrown away as a joke, had become the beacon for every soul the Assembly had tried to silence. She had not just survived her exile, she had weaponized it. 3 weeks after the final battle, under a sky washed clean by the rare desert rain, the colony gathered not for a funeral, but for a union. Ryan and Avala stood before the people they had saved, human words and Ethelis vows mingling in the air like a new language. Ryan took her hand, his voice rough but steady, declaring that he had fought alone for far too long. But in her, he had found a home worth any price. Avala's violet eyes glistened as she spoke of the family that had cast her out and the one that had taken her in, promising that as long as they stood together, no empire would ever own their stars again. They were exiles no more. They were the architects of a destiny they had chosen for themselves. Years passed, and Kestrus III transformed from a barren outpost into the heart of a free frontier. The obsidian spire was rebuilt, not as a vault for secrets, but as a gateway for any wanderer seeking truth over tyranny. Visitors would often see the tall, silver-skinned woman and the scarred human commander walking the fields together, their love a story forged in fire and tempered by the very grit of the world that was supposed to be their grave. The Dominion had sent her to the rancher as a cruel joke, expecting her to fade into the dust. Instead, she became the proof that the galaxy's greatest strength is not found in bloodlines or gold, but in the choice to stand beside someone when the whole universe says to kneel. The Dominion's ledger for Kestrus III was eventually closed, marked with a single, unalterable word: unconquerable. And as the twin suns rose over the rebuilt colony, Avala and Ryan looked toward the horizon, ready for whatever audit the stars might bring next. The age of the trophy was dead, and the age of the protectors had truly begun. If you've traveled this far into the void with us, thank you for witnessing the rise of the Zenith Imperium. Our chronicle of defiance is only growing. Make sure you are subscribed to our channel so you don't miss the next revolution.